Did anyone actually understand what she just said? Richard Whitmore laughed loud enough for the entire private dining room to hear. Crystal glasses trembled softly as a few wealthy investors chuckled under their breath. Naomi Carter froze beside the table, fingers tightening around a silver tray warm from the kitchen. The smell of roasted sea bass and expensive wine still clung to the air, but suddenly the room felt colder. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, expensive watch catching the chandelier light. "I asked for polished service," he said, glancing toward Naomi with a thin smile. "Not an accent I need subtitles for." A few uncomfortable laughs spread across the room. Others looked down at their plates. Nobody corrected him. Nobody ever corrected Richard Whitmore. Naomi lowered her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then she carefully straightened the silverware near a guest's plate, hands steady even while heat climbed the back of her neck. "My apologies, sir," she said quietly, southern warmth still soft around her words. "Would you like me to bring another bottle?" Richard scoffed lightly. "No offense," he muttered to the German investor beside him. "But I can barely understand half of what she says." More laughter this time. Sharper. Naomi felt it settle heavy in her chest. Familiar weight. The kind she learned to carry years ago. Teachers who mistook silence for ignorance. Customers who spoke slower to her because of her skin and accent. Men in expensive suits who heard where she came from and decided who she was before she finished a sentence. She stepped back toward the service station, tray balanced against her hip. Keep moving. Stay invisible. Finish the shift. That was the rule. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Chicago shimmered against the dark sky, city lights reflecting across polished black marble like broken gold. Inside, the billion-dollar dinner continued. Richard Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Dynamics, sat at the center of it all. White. Wealthy. Untouchable. Tonight's deal mattered. International investors. A partnership large enough to shift markets by morning. Every detail had to be perfect. Every impression mattered. Which was exactly why Richard hated mistakes. A server brushed past Naomi carrying champagne. The kitchen doors swung open behind her, releasing a wave of heat and clattering metal before closing again. "Table 12 wants wine pairings translated," another server whispered. Naomi nodded automatically. Translation. Funny word. Nobody here knew how much of the world she quietly understood. At the end of the long table, one of the Japanese investors frowned suddenly at the menu. He tapped a line twice, speaking quickly to an assistant who blinked in confusion. Nobody responded. The investor repeated himself, slower now, irritation creeping into his voice. Richard exhaled hard. "Fantastic," he muttered, rubbing his forehead. "Where is the translator?" Nobody answered. An assistant reached for her phone. The investor looked increasingly frustrated. A long silence spread across the room. Naomi hesitated near the wine cart. Her fingers tightened slightly around the bottle in her hand. She knew that tone. Confusion. Allergy concern maybe. Cultural issue. Something important. Stay invisible, she reminded herself. But then the investor looked down at his untouched plate, clearly uncomfortable. Something shifted in Naomi's chest. Slowly, carefully, she stepped closer. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. Richard looked up immediately, already annoyed. "Naomi," he said flatly. "Not now." But Naomi was already looking at the investor. Then, quietly, fluently, in perfect Japanese, she asked, "Are you concerned about sesame oil contamination?" The room stopped breathing. Even the jazz music suddenly felt too loud. The investor looked up so quickly his chair scraped softly against the floor. Surprise flashed across his face. Relief followed almost instantly. He answered rapidly. Naomi listened. Nodded once. Then replied in smooth, effortless Japanese. Across the table, somebody whispered, "Wait, what?" Richard slowly lowered his wine glass. The amusement had disappeared from his face now. Replaced by something colder. Something unsettled. "You speak Japanese?" he asked slowly. Naomi looked at him. Calm. Respectful. Enough to help, sir. Silence. Then the Saudi investor near the center of the table suddenly frowned at a contract page and spoke sharply in Arabic to the translator beside him. Naomi's eyes drifted toward the document. Her expression changed. Tiny shift. Barely visible. But enough. Because for the first time all night, she looked worried. Naomi's stomach tightened. The Saudi investor was no longer looking at the translator. He was staring at the contract in front of him, jaw tense, speaking faster now in Arabic. The translator hesitated. Tiny pause. Barely noticeable. But Naomi caught it immediately. The room still had not recovered from the Japanese moment. Crystal glasses reflected warm chandelier light across polished marble, while investors exchanged quiet looks, confusion spreading like smoke nobody wanted to acknowledge. Richard Whitmore leaned back slowly in his chair, watching Naomi now with something dangerously close to irritation. Well, he said coldly, tapping his wine glass once with a finger. Apparently our waitress has hidden talents. A few nervous laughs followed. Thin. Uncomfortable. Naomi said nothing. She lowered her eyes briefly and stepped back toward the wine station. Keep moving. Stay invisible. That had always been safer. But the Saudi investor suddenly raised his voice again. Frustration. Clear this time. The translator answered quickly, stumbling over words. Naomi looked up. Something felt wrong. Not language wrong. Meaning wrong. Her fingers tightened around the wine bottle hard enough to feel cold glass against her palm. The Saudi investor looked unsettled now, glancing toward Richard with visible concern. Richard frowned. What is the issue? He asked. The translator forced a smile. Nothing major, he said quickly. Just minor wording clarification. Naomi's expression shifted. Tiny. Almost invisible. But enough. Because the Arabic phrase she had overheard did not mean clarification. It meant liability. Accountability. Legal risk. The kind of misunderstanding that destroys trust before signatures ever touch paper. She swallowed once. Not your problem, she told herself. Just finish the shift. But then the Saudi investor pushed the contract slightly away from him. A gesture small enough most people missed. Naomi did not. Richard noticed too. His jaw tightened immediately. Tonight's deal could not wobble. Not now. Not after 6 months of negotiations. Fix it, Richard muttered sharply toward the translator. The translator nodded fast, sweat beginning to show near his collar. Naomi looked at the document again. Something in her chest pulled tighter. Wrong word choices. Strange pauses. Avoided eye contact. Her mother used to call it the feeling before storms. The moment when the air changes first. Richard caught Naomi still watching. His patience snapped thinner. Naomi. His voice cut clean through the room. You already saved dinner once. A few executives shifted awkwardly. Go back to serving drinks. Heat crawled up Naomi's neck again. Familiar heat. Humiliation wrapped politely enough for rich people to pretend it was professionalism. She nodded once. Yes, sir. But before she could turn away, the Saudi investor suddenly spoke again. Directly to her. Fast Arabic. The room froze. Naomi stopped walking. Richard looked annoyed immediately. He asked if you understand what is happening. The translator interrupted quickly before Naomi could answer. Too quickly. Naomi's eyes moved toward him. Something cold settled in her stomach. That was not what he said. Not even close. The Saudi investor had actually asked one simple question. Do you trust this translation? Silence stretched across the table. Heavy now. Dangerous. Naomi could feel every eye moving toward her again. Richard exhaled hard. Do not make this complicated. His tone lowered. Warning hidden beneath politeness. Naomi looked at the investor. Then the translator. Then the contract. One wrong sentence could embarrass Richard in front of billionaires. One right sentence could destroy the entire room. Her pulse beat hard against her wrist. Finally, softly, carefully, she answered in fluent Arabic. Sir? Her voice stayed calm. Respectful. I think there may be a misunderstanding in the contract language. The translator nearly dropped his pen. Richard sat up slowly. Excuse me? Nobody moved. Nobody touched their food anymore. The Saudi investor leaned forward, surprise flickering across his face. Naomi inhaled once. Deep. Then gently pointed toward one paragraph near the center of the agreement. Because, she said quietly, eyes narrowing at the page now. This clause does not mean what he told you it means. The translator's face strained of color. Say that again, Richard Whitmore said slowly. The soft clink of silverware had stopped completely now. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light like frozen ice while every face around the table turned toward Naomi Carter. She stood perfectly still, fingers wrapped around the neck of the wine bottle, heat from the kitchen still trapped beneath her sleeves. Her pulse hammered hard enough to feel in her wrists. The translator, Naomi said carefully, eyes flicking once toward the contract binder near Richard's elbow. He did not translate the liability language correctly. The translator straightened so fast his chair scraped against the marble floor. That is ridiculous, he snapped. She is a waitress. Richard exhaled sharply through his nose, irritation spreading across his face. Exactly. He turned toward Naomi with a thin smile that somehow felt colder than anger. Tonight has been exciting enough. Why do not you go back to pouring drinks? A few uncomfortable laughs drifted around the table. Naomi felt heat rise into her throat. Familiar heat. The kind she had swallowed her whole life. Teachers who assumed she cheated. Customers who spoke slower around her like she was stupid. Men in suits who heard her accent before they heard her mind. She lowered her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then looked back up. Calm. Steady. Sir, she said softly, if you sign this agreement as it stands, your company may lose decision-making control after the first quarter. The room went silent again. Richard's smile disappeared. Excuse me? He said flatly. Naomi stepped closer to the table. Not too close. Careful. Respectful. The polished floor reflected the chandelier glow beneath her shoes as every eye tracked her movement. Page 14, she said quietly. Clause 7. The Saudi investor frowned immediately, flipping through the binder. Papers shifted. Leather chairs creaked. Someone near the back whispered. What is happening? Richard laughed once. Sharp. Forced. This is absurd. He loosened his tie slightly, jaw tightening. You are telling me my legal team, my translators, and 6 executives missed something because my waitress suddenly decided she is an attorney? Naomi did not flinch. No, sir. Her voice stayed even. I am saying the wording changed. The translator crossed his arms hard enough to wrinkle his jacket. She does not know what she is talking about. Naomi turned toward him slowly. Then, in flawless Arabic, she repeated the exact clause he had translated 10 minutes earlier. Word for word. The sound of Arabic rolling effortlessly from her mouth hit the room like a dropped glass. One of the Saudi executives actually leaned back in his chair. Another blinked hard. Richard's expression shifted. Not shock. Not yet. Something uglier. Discomfort. The translator swallowed visibly. Sweat glistened near his temple beneath the chandelier light. Naomi continued in Arabic, calm but precise. What was said implied shared oversight. She glanced at the contract. But this wording gives unilateral authority after operational review. Silence. Heavy now. Dangerous. The Saudi investor slowly removed his glasses. Is that true? He asked quietly. Nobody answered. The translator opened his mouth. Closed it. Richard looked toward him. Well? The translator shifted. There may have been contextual simplification. A low murmur spread around the room. Somebody at the far end quietly pulled out a phone beneath the table. Another executive rubbed his forehead. Richard's face darkened. Humiliation crawled slowly across his expression like something alive. Then he turned back to Naomi, forcing a laugh that landed too hard. Interesting trick, he said. Japanese and Arabic. He folded his arms. What next? You speak German too? Naomi looked at him for a second. Not angry. Not proud. Just tired. Then the German investor near the window suddenly cleared his throat and spoke quickly in German, something sharp and impossible to miss in his tone. Naomi answered immediately. Fluent. Smooth. Effortless. The investor's eyebrows shot up. Then, slowly, impossibly, he started. Smiling. Mr. Whitmore, he said in English, voice carrying across the dead silent room. You may have just insulted the smartest person at this table. Richard stopped breathing for half a second. Then Naomi's eyes drifted toward the contract again. Her expression changed. Small. Barely noticeable. But enough. Enough to make the smile disappear from her face. Sir, she said quietly, staring directly at Richard now. I think this problem is much worse than a translation mistake. What do you mean worse? Richard Whitmore's voice came out tighter than he intended. The confidence that had carried him all evening cracked just enough for everyone to hear it. The room had gone unnaturally still. No forks. No whispers. Just the low hum of air vents pushing cold air through the private dining suite and the soft clink of melting ice inside untouched glasses. Naomi Carter did not answer immediately. Her eyes stayed fixed on the contract binder near Richard's hand. The polished steel watch on his wrist reflected against the black table like something sharp. Sir, Naomi said carefully, voice low enough to force everyone to lean in. This wording does not just shift authority. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the wine tray. It slowly transfers operational ownership. Silence. Real silence now. The kind that presses against your chest. Richard blinked once. That is impossible. But his voice lacked conviction. Across the table, the German investor opened the document again, flipping pages faster this time. Paper whispered through the room like nervous breathing. The Saudi executive adjusted his glasses and frowned deeper. Show me, he said quietly. Naomi hesitated. 1 heartbeat. 2. She knew exactly what came next if she stepped too far. Waitresses did not interrupt billion-dollar negotiations. Black women with southern accents definitely did not challenge rooms full of executives who built careers on being right. Richard leaned back hard enough for his chair to creak. No. The word landed cold. We are not turning dinner service into legal theater. He forced a smile toward the investors, but tension clung to his jaw like steel. This has gone far enough. Naomi nodded once. Respectful. Calm. Then she quietly reached for the contract anyway. A few executives exchanged looks. One assistant near the corner subtly raised her phone, camera screen glowing faint blue beneath the table. Page 14, Naomi said softly. Read subsection C. Richard's attorney frowned and leaned closer. His polished pen tapped nervously against the table. That clause only applies under failed performance review, he said quickly. Naomi looked at him. Please read the last sentence. He paused. The room waited. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath cold chandelier light. Somebody cleared their throat. Then the attorney's expression changed. Small at first. Confused. Then pale. Richard, he said quietly. Richard's eyes snapped toward him. What? The attorney swallowed. Hard. The wording changed. A low murmur spread instantly around the room. Chairs shifted. Somebody whispered, No way. Another executive leaned over to read the page for himself. Richard grabbed the contract fast, irritation flashing into anger. Give me that. His fingers tightened against the binder hard enough to wrinkle paper. Naomi stayed perfectly still. She could feel the heat climbing her neck again. Feel every eye measuring her. Waiting for her to fail. Waiting for Richard to shut this down. Richard scanned the page. Once. Twice. His breathing changed. Barely noticeable, but there. Faster now. His thumb froze against the margin. Who drafted this? He asked sharply. Nobody answered. The translator looked away. One of the legal advisors adjusted his tie with shaking fingers. Across the room, somebody's phone vibrated against the table loud enough to make two people jump. The German investor finally leaned forward, voice calm but suddenly colder. Mr. Whitmore. He folded his hands slowly. If your waitress is correct. He let the sentence hang there. Heavy. Dangerous. You were about to surrender control of your own company. Richard's face lost color. Just enough. A flicker of panic moved behind his eyes before pride crushed it down. Fast. Hard. He stood abruptly, chair scraping across marble. Enough. His voice echoed sharper than intended. This conversation stays in this room. Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. Naomi felt something shift. The power in the room no longer pointed in one direction. Not entirely. Then the Saudi investor slowly closed the binder and looked directly at Naomi. How? He asked quietly, almost cautiously now. Does a waitress catch something 6 attorneys missed? Naomi opened her mouth. Stopped. Her eyes flicked once toward the translator. Then toward the attorney. Something darker crossed her face. Not fear. Recognition. And when she finally spoke, her voice came quieter than before. Because, she said carefully, I do not think this was an accident. The room stopped breathing. You think somebody did this on purpose? Richard Whitmore's voice cracked sharper than he meant it to. The private dining room felt smaller now, tighter, the cold chandelier light bouncing hard against polished silver and untouched glasses. Nobody moved. Even the servers near the doorway had stopped pretending not to listen. Naomi Carter stood perfectly still, pulse hammering beneath the cuff of her uniform. She could feel every eye in the room pressing into her skin. Be careful with what you say next, Richard added, jaw tightening. Not a warning. A threat wrapped in politeness. Naomi swallowed once. I am careful, sir. Her voice stayed soft. Steady. That is why I noticed the timestamp. Confusion flickered across several faces. Richard frowned immediately. Timestamp? Naomi stepped toward the binder again, careful, measured, like someone crossing thin ice. The legal revision history. Her finger hovered over the printed footer. This clause was modified 36 hours ago. Silence. Then a sharp inhale somewhere near the end of the table. Richard turned fast toward his legal counsel. That is impossible. His attorney grabbed the binder so quickly his water glass tipped sideways, cold water spilling across polished black stone. We finalized this 3 weeks ago. He muttered. Sweat had started gathering near his hairline. Naomi's eyes shifted toward the translator again. Then the attorney. Then back to the document. Tiny details. Tiny reactions. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Look at the initials, she said quietly. The revision tag does not match your legal department. The German investor leaned forward first. Then the Saudi executive. Suddenly everybody wanted the document. Hands moved. Pages turned faster. Phones unlocked beneath the table. A faint camera recording light reflected off somebody's watch. Richard noticed. His expression hardened instantly. Put the phones away, he snapped. Too late. The room had changed. This was no longer a dinner. It felt like a collapse happening in real time. The attorney stopped flipping pages. His face went pale. Richard. His voice sounded thinner now. These initials belong to outside counsel. Richard froze. What outside counsel? Nobody answered fast enough. Somewhere in the hallway beyond the private room, footsteps echoed sharply against marble floors. Fast. Purposeful. Naomi's stomach tightened. She had heard footsteps like that before. Hospital corridors. Lawyers' offices. Places where bad news moved quickly. Richard ripped the binder from the attorney's hands. No, he said under his breath. No. No. The confidence was gone now. Fully gone. His thumb shook against the edge of the page. Across the table, one of the Japanese investors quietly pushed his chair back an inch. Distance. Subtle. But devastating. The kind of movement that meant trust had already started leaving the room. Richard noticed that too. Panic flickered behind his eyes before anger buried it again. Fast. Violent. You. He looked directly at Naomi now. Who told you to do this? The question landed like a slap. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Naomi blinked once. Excuse me? Richard stepped closer. Too close now. Desperation wrapped in expensive cologne and unraveling pride. You walk in here speaking languages nobody knew you spoke, tearing apart my contract in front of investors, accusing my team of sabotage? His voice lowered. Dangerous. Who sent you? Naomi felt heat crawl up her neck again. Humiliation. Familiar. Heavy. The old instinct to shrink. To apologize for things she did not do. But then she glanced at the investors. Really looked at them. Fear. Confusion. Distrust. Nobody in this room understood what was happening anymore. Except her. Nobody sent me, she said quietly. I was serving wine. Silence. Real silence again. The kind that makes breathing sound loud. Then the private dining room doors suddenly opened. Hard. A woman in a navy business suit stepped inside, heels clicking sharply against marble. Her face was pale. One of Richard's executive assistants. She looked directly at him. Did not even glance at the guests. Mr. Whitmore, she said, voice tight, breath uneven. There is a problem downstairs. Richard closed his eyes for half a second like he already knew. What now? She swallowed hard. Federal investigators are here. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Naomi's fingers tightened around the wine tray. Then the assistant said something that made the entire room go still. And they are asking for this contract by name. The words landed heavier than sound. Federal investigators are here. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody blinked. The private dining room seemed to shrink around the table, cold chandelier light reflecting sharply off silverware and half-finished glasses of wine. Somewhere near the doorway, a phone vibrated softly against polished wood. Nobody reached for it. Richard Whitmore stood frozen, fingers still pressed against the contract binder like holding onto it might somehow stop everything unraveling. The color had drained from his face now, leaving only tension carved hard across his jaw. Who called them? He asked quietly. Too quietly. Nobody answered. Even his legal counsel looked away. Naomi Carter stood near the edge of the table, tray balanced against her hip, pulse finally slowing after hours of pressure. She could still feel eyes on her. Different now. Not dismissive. Not mocking. Measuring. Listening. The German investor leaned back slowly in his chair, studying her with unsettling calm. You knew, he said. Not accusing. Curious. Naomi hesitated. The room held its breath with her. No, she said softly. I just knew something felt wrong. Richard laughed once under his breath. Bitter. Hollow. Convenient. But the confidence behind the word had disappeared. His expensive watch glimmered beneath cold light as his hand trembled. Against the edge of the table. Tiny movement. Easy to miss. Impossible to ignore once seen. Outside the private dining room, footsteps echoed faintly through the marble hallway. Slow. Deliberate. Closer now. Somebody quietly locked their phone screen. Another investor loosened his tie. The atmosphere had shifted into something colder than panic. Anticipation. Naomi looked toward the contract again. Something still bothered her. The revision timestamp. The initials. The way the translator stopped speaking the moment she mentioned outside counsel. Little details sitting wrong in her chest. Her mother used to call it instinct. That quiet feeling before bad news arrived. Richard suddenly looked at her again, eyes sharper now. Desperate in a way rich men hated being seen. Tell me exactly what you think is happening. The request surprised everyone. Him most of all. Naomi blinked once. She could hear the soft hum of hidden air vents. The faint clatter of dishes somewhere far beyond the dining room doors. Her own breathing, slow but heavier now. I think, she said carefully, someone expected you to sign tonight. Silence. She glanced toward the translator's empty chair. And I think they expected nobody here to catch it. The Saudi investor lowered his glasses slowly. Meaning? Naomi swallowed once. Meaning whoever changed the contract probably knew which languages everyone in this room spoke. Nobody moved. The words settled hard. Heavy. The legal counsel looked visibly uncomfortable now. One investor quietly shifted his chair farther from the contract binder. Richard's throat moved as he swallowed. You are suggesting somebody built this entire dinner around deception? Naomi did not answer immediately. Instead, her eyes landed on the hotel logo stamped faintly across the binder corner. Something clicked. Tiny. Sharp. She stepped closer. Who printed these copies? She asked softly. The assistant near the door frowned. Hotel conference staff, I think. Naomi's expression changed. Small. Barely there. But enough for the German investor to notice. What? He asked immediately. Naomi looked toward the hallway just as the elevator bell echoed faintly somewhere. Outside. Then came footsteps again. Slower now. Heavier. More than one person. Richard noticed too. His face tightened. What is it? He asked. Naomi stared at the binder 1 second longer before finally speaking. Quietly. Carefully. Sir? She looked directly at Richard now. Calm in a way that suddenly unsettled everybody. If investigators already know this contract by name, her fingers tightened slightly against the tray, then somebody downstairs may already know who changed it. Nobody breathed. Then the private dining room handle slowly turned. The handle turned slowly. Every head in the room shifted at once. The private dining room doors opened with a soft hydraulic hiss, and suddenly the silence felt heavier than noise. 2 federal investigators stepped inside. Dark suits. Calm faces. No rush in their movements. The kind of confidence that made expensive people nervous. Behind them came hotel security, followed by a pale hotel manager clutching a tablet against his chest like something fragile. Nobody at the table touched their drinks anymore. The air itself felt colder. Richard Whitmore straightened immediately, forcing composure back onto his face like a man trying to stop a crack from spreading through glass. This is private, he said sharply. You cannot just walk into, Mr. Whitmore. The lead investigator interrupted calmly, voice low but impossible to ignore. We are here regarding a fraudulent contract transfer involving Whitmore Dynamics. The words landed like metal hitting concrete. Somebody near the back quietly cursed under their breath. One investor lowered his phone too late. The red recording light was still blinking. Richard laughed once. Forced. Empty. There has been some misunderstanding. His fingers tightened against the binder hard enough to whiten his knuckles. We were literally just reviewing revisions. The investigator's eyes dropped to the contract in Richard's hand. Good, he said. Because that document was flagged less than an hour ago. Naomi Carter stood perfectly still near the edge of the table, tray balanced against her hip, pulse slow now. Too slow. Strange how calm she felt after hours of humiliation. Like standing in the center of a storm after finally realizing where the lightning would land. The German investor glanced toward her. Then toward Richard. The difference in how he looked at them now felt impossible to miss. Respect on one side. Doubt on the other. Flagged by who? Richard asked, voice sharper this time. The investigator hesitated. Tiny pause. Just enough to make the room lean in. By an internal compliance analyst. Confusion flickered instantly across Richard's face. That makes no sense. My compliance division would have reported directly to me. The investigator exchanged a quick look with his partner. This analyst no longer works for your company. Silence again. Strange silence. The kind that rearranges power without asking permission. Naomi frowned slightly. Something about the phrasing caught her attention. The investigator continued. The report referenced unauthorized legal edits, language inconsistencies across international versions, and concealed transfer authority hidden inside multilingual terminology. A few investors turned slowly toward Naomi. Nobody even tried to hide it anymore. Richard noticed. Of course he noticed. His jaw tightened hard enough to twitch. And who exactly made this report? He asked quietly. Too quietly. Dangerous now. The investigator looked down at the folder in his hand. Then back up. We were hoping someone here might recognize the methodology. He opened the file and placed a printed page onto the polished black table. The paper slid softly beneath chandelier light until it stopped directly in front of Naomi. Her breath caught. Small. Almost invisible. But enough. Enough for the Saudi investor to notice immediately. Enough for Richard to turn toward her slowly. On the page sat annotations. Dense legal markings. Language corrections across Arabic, German, Japanese, and French. Tiny handwritten symbols circling contract manipulation patterns. Naomi knew those marks. Knew them instantly. Her stomach tightened. The room blurred around the edges for half a second. No. That could not be possible. Miss Carter? The investigator asked carefully now. You have seen this before. Not a question. Richard looked. Between Naomi and the document, something close to panic finally breaking through the anger. What is this? He demanded. Naomi swallowed once. Her fingers trembled for the first time all night. Barely. But enough. The handwriting stared back at her from the page. Familiar. Painfully familiar. She had not seen it in 3 years. Not since everything in her life collapsed. Sir? She said quietly, voice thinner now. I think. She stopped. The room held its breath with her. Even the investigators waited. Naomi looked up slowly, eyes fixed on the annotations like they belonged to a ghost. I think whoever reported this. Her throat tightened. Used to train me. Nobody moved. Richard's face changed completely. Shock first. Then confusion. Then something worse. Realization. Because for the first time all night, the room was no longer wondering whether Naomi Carter was qualified to speak. They were wondering who she really was. The room stayed silent long after Naomi stopped speaking. Nobody shifted. Nobody reached for their drink. Even the faint hum of the hidden air vents suddenly sounded louder against the pressure hanging over the table. Richard Whitmore stared at her like he was seeing someone entirely different for the first time. Not the waitress with the southern accent he mocked an hour ago. Not the woman holding a wine tray near the wall. Something in his face cracked quietly. Train you? He repeated, voice lower now. Smaller somehow. Naomi looked back at the page resting beneath the chandelier light. Familiar handwriting. Tight annotations in 4 languages. Tiny circles around manipulated legal wording. She knew every mark. Every pattern. 3 years ago, she said softly, I worked in multilingual compliance review. The words landed heavier than anyone expected. Across the table, the German investor slowly leaned back, folding his hands like pieces of a puzzle had finally clicked together. The Saudi executive looked down at the contract again, then back at Naomi, something close to disbelief moving through his expression. Richard's attorney looked sick. No, Richard said quietly, almost to himself. That is not possible. But even he no longer sounded convinced. Naomi finally looked up. Calm. Steady. Tired more than anything else. Life changes fast, sir, she said gently. Sometimes people stop seeing your experience before your circumstances do. Nobody missed the weight behind the sentence. Not after the jokes. Not after the laughter. A phone camera near the end of the table lowered slowly. No one seemed interested in recording anymore. The room had shifted into something stranger now. Respect. Embarrassment. Regret. One of the Japanese investors adjusted his glasses and bowed his head slightly toward Naomi. Small gesture. Deeply intentional. "You protected all of us tonight," he said quietly. Naomi shook her head once. "I just noticed something wrong." "No," the German investor interrupted softly. "You noticed what everyone here was too important to notice." Silence again. But warmer now. The kind that comes after truth settles into a room too proud to expect it. Richard stood motionless near the edge of the table, expensive suit suddenly looking heavier on him somehow. He glanced toward the contract. Then the investors. Then Naomi. The memory of his own voice seemed to echo back at him now. "I asked for English. Not subtitles." The humiliation had changed directions. Slowly. Completely. His throat moved once. Twice. Finally, he stepped forward. "Miss Carter." The room went still again. Naomi looked at him carefully. Richard exhaled hard through his nose. The confidence was gone now. Stripped clean. "I was wrong." The sentence barely made it into the room. Quiet. Honest. Painfully unfamiliar coming from someone like him. Several executives looked visibly stunned. Naomi did not react right away. She just stood there, hands steady against the tray, dignity untouched. No anger. No victory. Somehow that made it worse for Richard. "I judged you," he said, voice tighter now. "And I almost signed away my company because I was too busy protecting my ego." Nobody interrupted him. Nobody could. The room felt strangely intimate now. Heavy with realization. Naomi lowered her eyes for 1 second, then looked back up. "You were under pressure," she said softly. "That makes people stop listening sometimes." Richard blinked. The grace in her answer landed harder than anger ever could. Across the table, one investor quietly shook his head like he still could not believe what he had witnessed. The federal investigator finally stepped closer. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "if what you are saying about this methodology is correct," he glanced at the annotated file, "then whoever trained you may already know who orchestrated this." Naomi's expression changed. Small. Almost invisible. But enough. Because suddenly the room remembered something important. This was not over. Not even close. Her eyes dropped back to the handwriting. Familiar. Too familiar. Then slowly, almost unwillingly, she whispered something no one expected. "Unless..." The room held its breath again. Naomi's fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. "Unless the person who trained me is the reason this happened." Nobody moved. Not Richard. Not the investors. Not even the investigators. Outside the tall windows, the city lights shimmered against dark glass while inside the room, every face turned toward Naomi Carter with the same question burning silently behind their eyes. The room stayed still after Naomi spoke. No one rushed to fill the silence. Outside the tall windows, downtown Chicago glowed against the dark sky, soft reflections trembling across the glass like something uncertain trying to settle. The private dining room no longer felt like a place where billion-dollar deals happened. It felt like a room where too many people had just realized how wrong they had been. Naomi Carter stood quietly near the edge of the table, fingers resting lightly against the tray she had carried all night. The weight of it felt smaller now somehow. Around her, the cold tension had softened into something stranger. Respect. Regret. The federal investigator closed the file slowly. "We checked the reporting chain," he said, voice calm enough to make everyone lean in. "Your former mentor filed warnings for months." Naomi looked down. Her throat tightened slightly. "Then why did nobody stop it?" The investigator hesitated. Tiny pause. Honest pause. "Because nobody listened." Silence settled again. Deep this time. Richard Whitmore looked away first. The sentence landed harder on him than anyone else. Nobody listened. He had spent the entire evening dismissing the one person who saw everything clearly. The memory replayed quietly in his head. I asked for English. Not subtitles. He could still hear the laughter around the table. Still see Naomi standing there with a tray in her hands while he reduced her to an accent. Slowly, Richard stepped toward her. No performance now. No audience voice. Just exhaustion sitting heavy behind his eyes. Miss Carter, he said quietly. Naomi looked up. The room shifted with the moment. Investors watched without pretending not to anymore. Phones stayed lowered. Nobody interrupted. Richard swallowed once. I built an entire career believing I could read people. His voice faltered just enough to sound real. Tonight, he looked briefly at the contract. Then at her. I looked right through you. Naomi did not answer immediately. The faint hum of ventilation filled the silence between them. Somewhere in the hallway, distant footsteps echoed and disappeared again. The storm had passed. Only the weight remained. Richard exhaled slowly. You saved this company. He shook his head once, bitter at himself. And I almost sent you back to the kitchen. A few people lowered their eyes. Shane moved quietly through the room now, no longer pointed at Naomi. She shifted the tray to one hand. Calm. Grounded. Still carrying herself like someone who expected nothing from anyone. You were trying to protect something important, she said softly. People get scared when too much is on the line. Richard almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny. Because she had every reason to humiliate him back, and somehow she chose grace instead. That hurt worse. The German investor stood first. Straightened his jacket. Then, quietly, he extended his hand toward Naomi. You belong at tables like this, he said. The Saudi executive nodded once. No, he corrected gently. She belongs at the head of them. For the first time all night, Naomi looked caught off guard. Not by pressure. By kindness. Small thing. Quiet thing. But enough to soften something tired behind her. Eyes. Richard reached into his jacket slowly and pulled out a business card. His hand paused halfway. Then lowered again. Wrong moment. Wrong gesture. Instead, he looked at her honestly. If you ever want a seat in my company. He stopped himself. No. His jaw tightened briefly. Then relaxed. If you ever decide to let me earn back the respect I should have shown you from the start. His voice quieted. My door stays open. Naomi looked at him for a long second. Then gave the smallest nod. Not forgiveness exactly. Not rejection either. Just acknowledgement. Human. Earned. Morning light had begun creeping faintly against the edges of the skyline by the time the meeting finally ended. One by one, people left quietly. No handshakes. No celebration. Just thoughtful silence. Naomi stepped toward the service hallway alone, tray finally empty in her hands. Her footsteps echoed softly against polished marble. Behind her, Richard remained standing near the table, jacket off now, staring at the untouched glass of wine she never got to pour. Then his eyes landed on the folded dinner menu beside her seat. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 3 words she had scribbled hours earlier while helping the kitchen with translations. Listen before judging. Richard picked it up slowly. Outside, dawn stretched gold across the city skyline. And somewhere down the quiet hallway, Naomi Carter kept walking forward without looking back.